Dear executive panelists and friends, welcome to our second webinar of 2021. I'm Lillian Bosman, Chair of Communications and PR for the ICJW. I'm talking to you from Rio de Janeiro, just after 3 p.m. local time. Today's participants of our webinar come from all around the New York metropolitan area. They are the women who make up the United Nations ICJW New York team. Madeleine Brecher will act as our moderator today. She has spent the last 16 years as an active member of the UN New York team. We will have question and answers portion of our webinar. The participants can use the Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen. Click on the button and write your questions with the panelist's name you wish to ask. We will get to as many questions as time allows. This is a webinar, so the only people you will see are the panelists, but you can control how you see them. In the upper right corner of your screen is a button that allows you to make those changes. One last thing. We have a very special video to show you at the end of our presentation. Please stick around to see it. And now I would like to introduce you to Penny Conway, the president of ICJW.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from London. Welcome to this ICJW webinar, Meet Our Team at the UN in New York. My name is Penelope Conway and I'm the president of the International Council of Jewish Women. For those of you who are not familiar with ICJW, it is an umbrella organization of 38 Jewish women's groups around the world, from Mexico to South Africa, Australia to Uganda, and Sweden to Russia. ICJW was founded in 1912 and gives a voice to Jewish women and a platform for action and advocacy on the issues that concern us all. We aim to promote a just society based on human rights and Jewish values. ICJW has representation at the UN in New York, Geneva, and Vienna, at the Council of Europe, the European Women's Lobby, and the World Jewish Congress, among many other varied and prestigious organizations. Many of our affiliates are involved in advocacy for equal rights for women and an end to gender discrimination, while others are challenging the trafficking of women and children. Some are working to combat anti-Semitism and climate change, and many more participate in community service projects and social action in their local areas. This webinar is focusing on the varied and vital work of our representatives at the UN in New York, where ICJW has been involved since 1969. I am now delighted to introduce our moderator for this webinar, Madeleine Brecher. Madeleine has been involved at the UN since 2005. She was originally invited to serve as a member of the CSW New York Executive and served 2 terms as their communications secretary. She chaired the CSW Forum Delegates Reception for 7 years until she retired from the UN in 2020. And as someone who has attended the reception, I can testify that she did an amazing job. Madeleine will introduce the speakers and moderate the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Good afternoon to everyone from New York City. I'm honored to act as the moderator for today's webinar. I was a member, as you heard, of this illustrious team for 16 years, and they were some of the most rewarding years of my life. Actually, from the time that I was 16 years old and toured the UN with my mother in New York, it was my dream to be affiliated somehow, some way with that institution. This is one of those grand times in life that my dream actually came true. Just what does it mean to represent the NGO at the UN? ICJW is an NGO. It is a non-governmental organization. An NGO is a not-for-profit voluntary organization citizens group, which is organized to address issues in support of the public good. NGOs perform a variety of services and humanitarian functions. It brings citizens' concerns to government. It monitors policy and program implementation and encourages participation of civil society stakeholders at the community level. Most NGOs are organized around specific issues such as human rights, women's rights, concerns of children and girls, trafficking in people. Sound a bit like ICJW as Penny just described us? That is why we have earned NGO status at the United Nations. The UN Department of Global Communication helps NGOs gain access to and disseminate information about UN issues so the public, in our case, the ICJW Executive Committee and our global affiliates around the world, can better understand its aims and objectives and support its work. The team attends a myriad of briefings, forums, conferences, committee meetings on relevant ICJW concerns and writes up these briefings for distribution to ICJW leadership, for our website, and for our global affiliates. Today's webinar falls under the category of disseminating information about the workings of the UN. Now that you know what the team's responsibility is, it's time for you to meet the women who make this happen for ICJW. Each member of the team covers a committee that is related to ICJW's mission. She will introduce herself, explain how she came to join the ICJW family, describe her specific responsibilities, and tell you some of the highlights of her assignment. She will do all of this in under 8 minutes per woman. After all the speakers have been heard, we look forward to welcoming your questions and comments. Please remember to jot them down in the Q&A field. So it's time to meet the team. Fran Butensky, you are on.
Thank you, Madeline. I have been a part of the UN team in New York representing ICJW for close to 13 years. I guess you could say that I got here really about 40 years ago it started, when I joined the National Council of Jewish Women, which is the largest and oldest of the affiliates. I was a president of the Bergen County, New Jersey section, went on to serve as a commissioner for national organization, and then I became a member of the national board. Because of my NCJW experience, living in the New York area, and my close relationship with several members of the UN team, I was asked to join them at the UN. I had previously been invited to attend some briefings and was so impressed with the important work that they were doing and the fact that it had secretively become a goal of mine to get there and to become a member at the UN, that I jumped at the chance to join them. It was up to me to choose which committees I would like to serve on. The first committee I chose was the NGO Committee on Human Rights in New York, which is not to be confused with the Human Rights Council in Geneva. It must be noted that in addition to our New York team, ICJW has a team monitoring human rights issues at the United Nations Rights Council in Geneva. The committee operates under the auspices of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in New York. We keep in contact with our European colleagues and often exchange information with them. We get a chance to meet when some of them come to New York for CSW, or when we trot around the world attending ICJW executive meetings. That's when one of the fun perks of this job starts. The bonding and sharing of global issues and moral values is invaluable to us. Getting back to the Human Rights Committee, we work closely with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This office is responsible for protecting the human rights of all peoples. Over the years, many topics were covered in the human rights briefings, many of which Madeline just explained. Many were pertinent to ICJW, but not all, but they were of interest and importance. Some, but not all, include violence against women and girls, migration, immigration, LGBT rights, elimination of racism and xenophobia, global health, global warming. The list goes on, but in the interest of time and boredom, I'll stop here. In addition to the briefings, and before COVID-19, the committee often held more informal meetings at smaller venues. I recall one where the panel said some derogatory things about Israel. I can't remember the specifics, but I know that my anger was about to erupt. So I raised my hand and very calmly began my litany of all of the humanitarian aid and assistance Israel has given to so many countries around the world, to friends and enemies alike. There wasn't a sound in the room, but I felt great. Human rights is the common thread that runs through every aspect of the UN's agenda, and along with global peace is the basis for the UN's creation. Enter Eleanor Roosevelt, who believed that all human beings are free and equal, regardless of color, creed, or religion. When Harry Truman appointed her in 1946 to the US delegation to the United Nations, and after her appointment as chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights, she took on the task of drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The declaration put human beings, and not power politics, at the heart of the UN agenda. There was a wonderful webinar a couple of weeks ago called Exploring Eleanor Roosevelt's UN Legacy, hosted by UNA USA. I believe you can find the program on UNA's website if you're interested. The Council of Organizations is part of UNA USA. I sit on the executive committee of the council, which is a coalition of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who share the common goals of making the public more knowledgeable about global issues, supporting the United Nations, and strengthening US-UN relationships. During my volunteer career, I have been a staunch advocate for human rights. It is so rewarding to have the opportunity to share the important information I've learned with our ICJW affiliates around the globe. I'm very grateful to have this experience, and I love being here.
Thank you so much, Fran. Thank you. Each week, when we make plans to meet at the UN for our briefing, Fran, who travels in for the 90-minute meeting from New Jersey, always wants to make sure that we'll be having a team lunch together on that day. We agree with her that parking costs way too much without lunch included. Joan Lurie, you're next.
Thank you very much, Madeline, for the introduction. As Madeline said, my name is Joan Lurie. I'm talking to you from New York. I'm a physicist and a lifelong Zionist. And now in retirement, I'm more of a Zionist than a physicist, as you'll soon hear. I've spent many years working on satellite imagery, including one wonderful year working with an Israeli company to build a ground station to receive pictures. So I've really enjoyed that. Okay, so how did I get here? I joined ICJW 50 years ago in New Jersey. I've been on the board of 3 sections in 3 different states. And while I was serving on the New York board, I was invited by Doris Leifer, who was then a member of the UN team, to join the ICJW team. Unlike Fran, I didn't really make a secret of the fact that I wanted to be on this team, and Doris knew it, so that was great. It's been a fascinating journey and definitely the best volunteer job I've ever had. I joined the Sustainable Development Committee just as they were starting to develop sustainability goals for the United Nations. So that's been fascinating. And with Fran, I'm also on the Human Rights Committee and also on one notable occasion stood up and defended Israel. So there is a slight issue there, obviously. One of the other really fun things I did was chair a workshop at a Department of Public Information NGO conference in 2009 in Mexico City. It was all about disarmament, and I got to use my knowledge of how satellites can observe violations of disarmament treaties at a UN conference. That was great fun. I've also participated in meetings about anti-Semitism and in particular attended the Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony every year since 2006. I've been at this, by the way, since 2005. Most important of my early years at the UN is I learned my way around, and I was shocked at the degree of anti-Semitism that was apparent everywhere. So we as ICJW have long been members of the informal caucus of Jewish NGOs at the UN. And we met fairly regularly, but about 3 years ago, it appeared that the organization was going to dissolve. Two of us decided that as the only conglomeration of Jewish organizations at the United Nations, we could not afford to let it go. So we decided to try to convert it to a project-oriented organization. We invited everyone we've ever seen at a Jewish NGO meeting to a meeting at a local synagogue in 2017 and decided unanimously that the project we would take on would be trying to influence the hideous education provided by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency to 500,000 children a year in Palestinian refugee camps. 3 generations of young Palestinians have been incited to hate and kill Jews. Their parents and many of their teachers were educated in the same schools, so this is ingrained. The textbooks glorify jihad, deny the existence of Israel, and preach a war of return, which would give all of the land from the Mediterranean to the Jordan to the Palestinians. In summer camps, children are trained to be soldiers. This is defined by international law as child abuse, and yet it goes on and on, more or less under sponsorship of the United Nations. So the JNGOs became UNRWA, Stop Teaching Hate. UNRWA is the acronym for United Nations Relief and Works Agency, so I don't have to keep saying that. We advocate for the right of Palestinian children to have an incitement-free education which teaches them skills for life and not murder and martyrdom. I'm now going to attempt to share my screen with you to show you some interesting things. Okay, I hope you're all seeing something other than my face now, namely something which says the path to peace begins in the classroom. We really do believe that if the Palestinian children are not going to have an education that promotes peace, there will never be a peace partner for Israel in the Palestinian community. And for that reason, this organization seemed like the right way to go. We have a website, which is up here. It's www.reformunrwa.com. And we advocate for this issue at the United Nations and in the United States government. We found out early on that one of our primary tasks was going to be raising awareness of this issue. Major Jewish organizations have systematically either ignored it or not known about it for 70 years. So that's an important part of what we do. And I want to just show you an example of what the children learn, which is really kind of appalling. This is a 3rd grade textbook song, a song they're taught in the classroom in our beautiful language. That's Arabic, of course, grade 3. Notice they will sacrifice their blood in order to water the land of the noble ones and to remove the usurper from their country. That's really pretty horrendous things to teach 8-year-olds, and it just goes on and on and on. I'm going to show you, oh, by the way, I should also point out that I've given numerous talks about this subject, although I never tried to confine it to 8 minutes before, and also published papers, and there's a lot of other work on our website. I'm going to show you a film which is somewhat disturbing, and here it is, but look in the upper left-hand corner where you'll see the location where these things are happening.
لأنه نعمل حرب إنه نفرجي اليهود إنه إحنا عن طريق المقاومة في عمليات الطعن والدعس والطخ ورمي الحجارة. عمليات الدعس وعمليات الطعن. إذا بدك بطلع بستشهد عادي. أنا إن شاء الله أساعد الشباب وإن شاء الله أصير مقاوم بالمستقبل مع الدولة الإسلامية.
فإن الجنود الأشداء قادمون بإذن الله عز وجل، سوف يرونه في حيفا وتل أبيب وكل مكان.
في عمليات كشفية جهادية حركية على تدريب السلاح البسيط الخفيف لنعدهم للمستقبل لكل النواحي.
سيكون في هناك شيء جديد يعني يكسبه هذا المشروع، لنصل إلى مرحلة أن يكون جميع أبنائنا وجميع شبابنا شباب يعني قد محونا الأمية على السلاح إن شاء الله.
أعمل عمليات، أطلع أستشهد، أعمل أي شيء في دلال الأقصى، ويا ريت أنا أستشهد.
Hello teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me, look right through me.
Okay, I hope you found that film a little disturbing, or maybe a lot disturbing, but it's really an appalling situation. There are a couple of conclusions one can draw quickly, and quickly is all I've got, so let me try that on you. The most appalling fact is that Israel is a member of the UN. So why does the UN continue to support UNRWA in spite of this anti-Israel agenda? The reasons are very complicated. I'd be happy to explain them, but there's no time for that now. It has to do with a big organization at the UN, which has grown up to support the Palestinians. In all the years that I have followed this situation at the UN, only 2 people have ever spoken out loudly in public about this outrageous approval of a scheme to destroy a UN member. The 2 people are Danny Danon, who was Israel's last ambassador just recently to the UN, and our own ambassador, Nikki Haley. This lack of outrage or even serious criticism is our motivation for continuing this work. And we do work very hard at it. The other thing that we need to tell you is that the children are clearly not prepared for life. They have no job skills when they're finished, and they really have just been trained for institutionalized poverty and murder. The large and powerful Jewish organizations of the world are ignoring this. It's barely even mentioned in the past, but more recently, I am happy to report that all over the world, including in Israel, more and more organizations are getting together to try to do something about this. So stay tuned. The Abraham Accords, a week entitled Palestinian Child Soldiers, all of these are hopeful efforts, and we hope for progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you so much. From the time that I met Joan when she joined the UN team, she was truly passionate about the state of Israel. Through her work at the UN, she learned about the critical UNRWA issue. She organized a group of very committed women to make a difference, and she has done the most incredible job. Joan, we are very proud of you. Thank you. Judy Mintz is up next, please.
Okay, I joined ICJW 46 years ago. It's hard to believe. I actually was looking for something to do. I was a young mother. At that time, I only had one child. And locally, I became a member of NCJW USA, and my section was Peninsula on Long Island. Once I joined, I always was challenged, made very good friends, obtained new skills, and being on a webinar today is one of them. And I was offered amazing opportunities. I was the section president. Then I too was on the national board for 15 years, 2 terms as a board member, then as national president, as national treasurer. And then finally, I had 6 years as being a vice president, and my portfolio was Israel. What a privilege that was. And now I'm on the ICJW NGO team, and I'm called the main rep. And what does that mean? That means I have a lot of computer work to do, but it's always worked out fine. Just to talk a little bit of general responsibilities of being on the team, we educate and we create awareness. We have participated yearly in the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, where the world turns orange and we wear our orange clothes. We're also part of Holocaust Remembrance. We've heard from survivors, liberators, and just recently we learned of the Windemar children. Then there's the Commission on the Status of Women, where we attend and also plan side events. There are briefings organized by the UN Israel Mission, and as members of ICJW, of course, we look at as a privilege and really a responsibility to be there for the state of Israel. And lastly, when it's appropriate, we add ICJW's name to many statements that reflect ICJW's priorities. I have 2 specific responsibilities, 2 committees that I belong to representing ICJW. One is UNICEF, which is the UN International Children's Emergency Fund. UNICEF is driven by core values. It does its wonderful work in 190 countries and territories. It shows care, respect, integrity, trust, and accountability. Specifically, UNICEF promotes gender equality and education. It wants to eliminate malnutrition, support mental health, address the climate crisis, and now it is working with a COVID campaign, which includes education, the ideas of returning girls to school, how-tos with parenting tips, and even proper hand washing techniques. I had 2 experiences while serving on the UNICEF committee. They both involved hearing chilling thoughts that I just never would have heard about if I wasn't sitting in the room at the right time. The first was a question: what does stay at home mean for children who call the street home? Wow, that was really very earth-shattering to me. And the second had to do with the distribution of malaria nets. And I think all of us understand and can picture what this net looks like over a bed. And we were challenged, okay, there are malaria nets, malaria is still a disease that must be fought around the world. But what happens if you do not have a bed? How can you have a malaria net? So that was something else that I've heard and will always remember. The other group, NGO committee that I belong to, is the Working Group for Girls. This is a coalition of over 40 NGOs, and we meet monthly. The committee works for girls and with girls. It elevates their voices because girls must be included in UN documents. Often women are included, but what about the girls? We also on this committee believe that girls should advocate on their own and be empowered. And then we try to make sure that girls have a seat at the table. The work of WGG, or Working Group for Girls, lasts the whole year. In October, there's the International Day for the Girl. WGG is also part of CSW. And at CSW, there are local conversations where girls are invited to come together and to create a statement with their needs and their beliefs. Also, another interesting idea from GGG was we have girl advocates. These are young girls in high school who really are available in the greater New York area, and they come to our meetings. So here are these high school students hearing what the WGG stands for, and very often it's their voices that set the course of action. And lately, I have just been part of a new initiative, and that is child labor. I just want to talk about an accomplishment that I'm very proud of, and that has to do with the International Day of the Girl, which is an annual event held October 11th. The UN declared this day to recognize girls' rights and to emphasize the many challenges that they face. What my greatest accomplishment is, I brought this concept back to my local section. And through the hard working of our local chair, a group of high school students have educated themselves. And they have gone into their local high schools and spoken about forced early marriage, genital mutilation, trafficking and the abduction of girls, sexual abuse, and pornography. So it was very self-fulfilling to know that something I learned on the international level was brought down to my local school and involving high school students. And then when we talk about different statements to sign on, one was called Black Lives Matter. And this was, I'm sure most of you have heard of this campaign in the United States to help people, Black people and people of color. And the statement itself was to express rage and solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was very proud to ask if it was proper, and it was proper. So ICJW's name was added on to this statement. And I just want you to know, if you're interested in more about Working Group for Girls, they too have a website. It's called girlsrights.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you so much for that information. Girls are so lucky to have you as their advocate. As members of the UN team, you heard that we are automatically part of the ICJW Executive Committee. A few years back, Judy, Fran, and I attended the Executive Committee in Paris. The meetings were educational, but we had the most extraordinary time staying at this funny little hotel on the left bank where we made plenty of time for shopping, museums, and la cuisine. We call that an ICJW UN team perk. Right, girls? Sarah Winkowski, you are our next speaker today.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Well, my experience is quite different from my friends and colleagues. First of all, you will notice that my accent is not American. I'm not an American. I come from Uruguay. So that's very clear. Sorry. In fact, my involvement with UN started in the 70s, last century, when my husband became a UN staff member and we were stationed in Peru. After Peru, we went to Nairobi, Kenya, where I also joined the UN staff as a translator. During those years, I attended several conferences related to human settlements and environment. My first experience with women issues at the UN was in 1985 when I attended the United Nations Women's Conference in Nairobi. For us, Jewish women, one of the successes of the Nairobi conference was that the infamous sentence, Zionism is equal to racism, which was included for the first time in a document at the Women's Conference in Mexico City, was deleted for the first time from a document. One of the ugly experiences in the conference was to see Hannah Hashrali, the Palestinian delegate, went into the assembly room with a group of women chanting, "Death to the Jews, death to Israel." It was also an experience to attend a meeting organized by the Iranian women, where they said that we, the Western women, are not really free. The Iranian women were really free. Why? Because they had the freedom to go to jail if their husbands were in prison. And they had the freedom of not having to work because their husbands were obliged to support them. I became more involved with ICJW in 1989 when we went back to live in Uruguay. And in 1993, Lila Siegel, then president of ICJW, invited me to attend the Committee on Status of Women in New York, which is held in March every year, and I have never stopped attending ever since. We used to meet with June Jacobs and with Donna Gary during the 2 weeks of the meeting, trying to attend all the meetings organized by the Palestinian women. And we went there. We had no sign that we were Jewish. I had a card here that said Sarah Winkowski, ICJW, Uruguay. And so we could somehow argue and explain what they were saying was not really true. I attended the United Nations conference in Beijing. As you recall, 50,000 women were there fighting for the advancement of women and for women's rights. And with the statement that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights became popular. It was in Beijing where the strategies and plan of actions to enhance women's rights was approved. There was a joke going around which said, look, since the world is a world, men have had the power, and see what a disaster of world we have. When women will have the power, there will be peace in the world. So as you see, I have been involved with the UN for many, many years. I was president of ICJW in 2002. But it was only 3 years ago that I became ICJW delegate in the Stop Trafficking in Persons Committee when I came to live to the United States. This is a dear committee for ICJW, as trafficking is the raison d'etre of our organization. It was because of women's trafficking that American and German Jewish women began to meet by the end of 1890 and finally founded the International Council of Jewish Women in 1912. It's really annoying that over 100 years after, we are still fighting the same scourge. The committee works to prevent human trafficking and works with survivors. It is a coalition of 45 different organizations, most of them religious NGOs. We meet once a month and organize events for the CSW, and most of the delegates' NGOs organize events during the year. I have not been long enough in the committee, but I can mention 2 successes. The first one is the Gift Box, a project to fight human trafficking, launched by this committee and the United Nations Initiative to fight human trafficking in 2012 for the London Olympic. It was also rolled out in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, during the major sporting events in 2013, 14, and 16. This 10-foot high structure functions as a metaphor for the techniques used for sex traffickers. It is primarily used to raise awareness and introduce people to the issue of human trafficking through photographs and survivor stories showing the harsh realities of sex trafficking. Many visitors to the gift box were surprised to learn that human trafficking happens in their city or town. The common perception is it happens somewhere else, not in my street, not in my city. The second success is the campaign to promote accountability of the chocolate enterprises for using children as slaves in the cacao fields, and to create awareness on the need to pressure cocoa companies, including Hershey, Godiva, Mars, and Nestle, to end child labor in the cocoa fields. So this is my experience, and thank you very much for listening to me.
I just want to thank Sarah for making it her business to be here today, because she moderated a webinar this morning for 2 hours. So we thank you. And I also thank you, Sarah, because you were the president of ICJW who appointed me to the UN team 16 years ago. I will forever be grateful to you for helping me fulfill my dream. And I would just like to piggyback on something that you said about the gift backs, because it was the person representing ICJW on that trafficking committee just before you, Rita Fishman, who was very instrumental in making that a success. And we were so proud of her at that time. So I thank you for your report. Carol Tulkin is next.
Thank you. This is quite a group to follow. I'm so impressed and I'm so happy to be here. I'm the newest member on the team, and I've only been involved for maybe a month. And I began my affiliation with National Council of Jewish Women through working on a community project on ageism with the president of our local chapter, which is Peninsula section, where I met Judy. The president of NCJW at that time encouraged me to join. And when I retired from my position as director of a senior center, I'm a gerontologist, I began a really amazing journey of community service, education, advocacy, and lifelong friendships. And Judy is one of those friendships that I'm so grateful for. She was the one that encouraged me to join ICJW. It's interesting because I lived on Long Island and I've been in the city now for 5 years. And one of the things that I was really interested in was becoming involved in the UN. And our apartment is 3 blocks away from the UN, so that when we don't have to meet virtually, I can be there. And anyone who is far away can certainly share my apartment with me. And I also joined at a really exciting time because now is the perfect time to become involved with the Commission on the Status of Women. This is the 65th session of the Commission, and it's called CSW 65. It's taking place virtually from the 15th to the 26th of March, and representatives from all over the world will have the opportunity to participate. What is CSW 65? It provides an opportunity to review the progress towards women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, the elimination of violence, achieving gender equality, and the empowerment of all women and girls. It's also a key opportunity to plan and discuss new initiatives and actions to further these goals. I'm excited to say that this year is a parallel event for CSW 65. ICJW is co-sponsoring a virtual presentation skills workshop entitled Women Speak Up, facilitated by the International Public Speaking Coach, Jenny Prisk. And this event will take place on Wednesday, March 17th at 1 p.m. via Zoom, and the link will be provided. I urge all of you to join this workshop. It will enable you to gain the skills necessary to make your voices heard. So please join us. I look forward to meeting all of you. Thank you very much.
I started to say that we are really delighted to welcome Carol to the team and to welcome her as the newest member of the representative to the Committee on the Status of Women. That was my bailiwick all of these years, and I look forward to reading your reports, Carol, on the future accomplishments of the committee. An interesting note for you and for everyone, that before quarantine and before COVID, each month at the monthly meeting, we packed about 60 to 75 women into a small room across from the UN. Now, with Zoom and the capability of reaching a global audience, I kid you not, there are 500 women on every NGO CSW monthly meeting coming out of New York these days. It's just been astonishing. So that's one of the positive happenings from the quarantine and having to move over to Zoom. Now it's time for the Q&A, and I'm seeing a lot of questions up here. I'm delighted to see. I'm going to request that you try to keep your questions to just one, because several people have written 2 or 3, and I'd like as many people as possible to get to them. So I am going to go first to Vera Cronenberg and say to Vera that we are very happy that you are going to be attending CSW for the first time. Before, people had to come to New York, and now it will be virtual, and a fabulous program is planned. I'm going to take this question because this is the area that I've been working in. Vera is asking for some guidance, perhaps, on how to tackle the agenda and tell what sessions you have to join. The first thing I want to say to you, which is very important, to even attend the parallel events that we will be running, and we will be co-sponsoring 2 of them this year. One of them Carol spoke to you about before. You must register on the platform for CSW. The office of ICJW will be sending a long email that I send to them, and you will be receiving it tomorrow. And this is for ICJW women and executive committee that are on this call. You will be getting this. I don't know if everyone at this point who is on the call as a guest that Lillian invited, but Lillian will have the memo too. It will give you instructions on how to register, because before you can do anything or attend any of these 600 events, you do have to register. So you're going to get this tomorrow, and you follow the instructions on that first. Then in the next week or 2 following that, you will be receiving a flyer for each of the 2 ICJW events specifically that we would encourage you to attend. The other events, you need to look through the agenda day by day, the days that you're free, and see what appeals to you. What are your interests, and what are ICJW priorities where some of these parallel events will work for you. That's the best I can tell you. People will choose different things. There will be some trainings. You might want the training. So look through the agenda. I explain that to you, and go day by day once you yourself register and find a place, okay? I don't want to take too long on each question. I'm going to move. Did anybody else want to have anything to say about that? On things that you chose to go to? Because there are 2 places you can attend events. One is through UN Women, which are the events from member states. The NGO forum is by NGOs, and there are over 600 events that you would be able to attend through there. Again, watch for this paper that will explain it, because it is a lot more complicated because it's different. I have a question here from Bev Goldman. I believe she's from South Africa. And this is for Joan. Is the anti-Semitism at the UN a result of the majority of UN members being from Arab and non-aligned states, as opposed to the fewer numbers of Western orientations? And for 15 years, she ran a media team, Israel and South Africa, which fought the vitriolic media coverage of Israel in the media. And she did a lot of research on Palestinian textbooks. She wants you to know that she has read your reports, Joan, and they are very, very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Madeline, for the introduction. I had already studied her question, so this is good. Yes and no, Bev, is the answer. Yes, there are a majority of UN members who come from Arab and non-aligned states. However, what the real issue is about anti-Semitism at the UN, and this is my opinion after I've studied it for 15 or 16 years, is that an enormous apparatus called the Division of Palestinian Rights has risen up at the UN. There is no other people on earth who are as well represented. Among the many organizations that they oversee are UNRWA, which is the biggest single agency in the UN, has more employees than any other agency. And then there is a committee which I always have to write down the name of because I can never remember it. It's the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. And the woman Ashwari that Sarah Winkowski mentioned was a loud voice on that committee with whom I had an altercation one day, but that's beside the point. In any case, this enormous apparatus is everywhere in the UN. It is impossible to ignore it. So when an anti-Israel resolution comes up in the General Assembly, by reflex, everybody votes against Israel because they've been told to by all of these organizations. Only just in the past year or so, thanks whether we like it or not to some of the actions of the Trump administration, among other things, in the last year or so, the majorities who vote automatically and reflexively against Israel have decreased from about 110 votes to sometimes just about 80, which is a good thing, but it's not enough. So that's important. And I'd like to, if I may, answer the next question too, which is from Lillian Seidman asking me how I feel about President Biden, who wants to support UNRWA again, if I am not mistaken. That is a subject for an entire other webinar. And someday perhaps you'll hear me talk about it. Some of his appointees are 100% pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel. So we have a long battle ahead of us. And beyond that, this is going to be, in the words of a prominent woman Zionist with whom I work fairly often, a very long, hard 4 years. So I'm not optimistic about either the UN or the United States. The only thing I am optimistic about is the burgeoning friendship between Israel and other Arab countries because of the Abraham Accords, for one and only one reason. Those accords were passed after the Palestinians went to the Arab League and said, stop this, and the Arab League essentially said, go away. That's the first time that's ever happened. So over the objections of the Palestinians, we have made progress toward peace. That is something that will never be forgotten.
Thank you, Joan. There's a question from Clarita Spitz for Judy Mintz. And anybody else, by the way, is welcome to raise your hand after Judy speaks if you have anything to add. Could you please explain, I have heard that Black Lives Matter has turned to anti-Semitism. What information do you have on that?
Okay. I don't really have any expert information, only like what I read in the papers, what I see on television. There definitely are influences inside Black Lives Matter that people can look at as being anti-Semitic. And I think there's a hope that the Jewish history and their concern with civil rights and human rights in the United States will be emphasized much more than a more radical review of some of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter. So we're hopeful, and truly as Jewish people, of course, we are very sympathetic to the rights of all people. And that's all I can say.
Could I just add a word?
Sure.
Okay. If you want to give money to a Black cause, give it to NAACP. The Black Lives Matter was founded by pro-Palestinian people who developed BDS in this country. They are completely anti-Israel. They make anti-Israel statements all the time. And I really find it sort of unpleasant that rabbis are telling people to give money to Black Lives Matter. Give it to NAACP, give it to ADL. There are plenty of organizations full of right-minded people of both races that are trying to help Blacks in this country. And Black Lives Matter is not, in my mind, one of those acceptable organizations.
Well, that's interesting to know, and you can do some reading and make up your own opinion if you're going to
That's
give
right.
money.
Absolutely.
There's a question here for Sarah Winkowski from Alexandra Jack, and it's thanks for sharing your experience. You have been engaged in fighting such important issues that are frustratingly present. What would be your word of advice for activists that might feel discouraged when it seems like an endless fight? We know that. Sarah?
Don't go on fighting, don't dismay. As Madeline said, I just finished a webinar on women agunot, women that whose husbands don't give them the Jewish divorce. ICJW has been working on that and fighting since the 60s, last century. And we are still fighting, and we are still fighting against trafficking. And don't stop, just go on. If we go to the UN status of women, since I started, I sometimes feel that we go one step forward and 2 steps backwards. But the only way that you can get something is go on, don't dismay, if that's the right word in English. Just fight for your goals and your ideas.
Thank you. Anyone else on that? I have another question here from Bill and Debbie. And the question is, do you have any connection to UN Women? I'm going to tie this because when I was an officer of the Committee on the Status of Women for many years, I worked very, very closely with UN Women. They have been quite extraordinary, and something that we were able to do with UN Women was set up. You heard that ICJW has UN reps in 3 regions of the world, 3 cities, in Geneva, in Vienna, and in New York. That's all one region. When UN Women formed at the beginning of this century, actually, they decided to set up offices in each of the regions of the world, the UN regions. So there's one in South America, we are in the North America, Canada, Western Europe region. There's Africa, there's the Middle East, and there's Asia, and that's where New Zealand and Australia would be. So they have offices there. And when I was an officer of the Committee on the Status of Women, we decided that we should have NGO civil society organizations in the 5 regions, because there are UN Women there to work with, and the priorities for women in each of these regions are totally different. So that was a really unbelievable major undertaking that we took back about 5 or 6 years ago. And now each one of the regions, CSW, works independently and determines what the priorities are there. They prepare papers for that region, yet we are all very close when it comes to CSW, and we get together in March where 20,000 women came to New York. Now they're going to have, and you will all have this opportunity of being involved on the forum, on the platform that is being arranged, where you have ability to talk to people, to see what each person who signs up does, to select a number of events every day. But all of these things that are done are worked in tandem with UN Women and the Committee on the Status of Women. So yes, we do work very closely with them. I see that we have another question from Susan. How much time over the course of a week do you spend on your UN commitment? Anyone want to take that? Judy, Fran? Judy and then Fran.
Okay, I think it really depends. That's a very hard question to answer. When it was Holocaust Remembrance, we each were Zooming to lots of different sessions, and it could have been every day for 2 hours. Then there are, the summer months are usually very slow. My working group for girls, it depends, but I have a monthly meeting for 2 hours. UNICEF meets only a few times a year as far as the NGO participation. So it can be very busy when we have to write a report for ICJW. It could be very busy after we've attended a session that we want to send in what we learned, but then there are quiet times. So that's my feeling.
Okay, Fran?
Well, actually, I would say, you know, more or less the same thing. My experience is a little different because I commute. So I spend at least 2 hours, well, about 2 hours in the car from my house to the parking garage until I get to the UN. So that's already 2 hours. And then there's the meeting, and then there's coming home if the meeting requires a report. And then, as Judy said, you know, the Holocaust, I would say more than 12 hours that week, at least on that, and writing reports and watching the programs. So it can vary from, mine can vary from 6 to 12 to 15 hours a week.
I'm going to just add a piece of that from another question. But has COVID, and then I'll call you, Joan, to answer this, okay? I see your hand. Has the COVID quarantine affected your time and your work at the UN this past year? And because of Zoom, do you find you can even tune into more things? So Joan, you can handle this and respond anyway.
Actually, that's why I was raising my hand. I was going to say to Fran, I bet you would love to be back to commuting instead of being locked up. But
right. There's now, spend more time now.
Right. I am spending much more time now because now I am, first of all, I'm the co-chair of all of the Jewish NGOs at the UN, and there's no way to reach them. I mean, it used to be we'd be in the hallway, we'd meet them, we'd be in a meeting, we'd see them, we'd go to lunch, as Judy said, or somebody said, for so much fun. Madeline, I think, said that. But now every meeting is fraught with technology, if I may put it that way. And so I spend much more time trying to keep track of what everybody's doing and how we're doing it together. And we're having a meeting at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to which all the JNGOs are invited. Not that they'll all show up, but they're all invited. And I've spent hours and hours and hours getting ready for that meeting. So I spent much more time now, and I enjoyed the time more before COVID. So that's my feeling anyway.
Sarah, I'd love to ask, select you, but our time is running out, and there's one more important question that I have here. So I'm going to take this question. It's from Gail, and the question is there a space for internship students, political science or international relations or communications, that you could mentor to continue this ICJW UN assignment into the next generation? Does anybody see that we could do that in the role as a member of the ICJW team? Judy?
Well, I know on Working Group for Girls, we always go around a room and introduce ourselves. And many of the committee is composed of interns. So in other words, if somebody would be interested in the work of ICJW, but our UN work for Working Group for Girls, they could become an intern and work for the committee representing ICJW. That definitely would be a space. I don't know if it would be of interest. I mean, most of the interns are young women at local universities. But I bet with Zoom especially, or if someone is in the metropolitan area and they're interested, they could participate.
I know that the UN allows junior representatives in order to get young women in. And I think it would be interesting for you to find out if ICJW has access. Are we allowed to have junior representatives? I've heard from actually NCJW leadership that they can do that, in which case it would be an interesting thing where those women who came in as juniors could work their way up at some point in time. Fran?
I just wanted to add that we are allotted 2 spaces when we each one of us gets our badges when we have to register for NCJW for the UN, that we have 2 spaces available for internships, and they have to be under 30, those people. So that's, you know, that's a way for us to get them.
Yeah, that is, Fran, definitely, but it's through the global communications offices. It's not through ECOSOC. So you should look into how you would be able to do it. It would be a very exciting opportunity if you could get that to work. But I see that our time is up. I thank you all, and I hope that you found, to our audience, this is directed actually, we hope that you found that this was an educational and enjoyable session. Please watch for our CSW 65 flyer, which Lillian will be forwarding to you within the next week or 2. And perhaps if you find that you would like that other form that I sent out about how to register, because you, as I said, you do have to register on the platform before you can pay it, join any of these sessions. So Lillian can then send that form out to you too. You can get in touch with her. But thank you very much. And I pass it back to Penny now, and I wish all of you to be very safe at this very crazy time in the world.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you very much. It's been a most amazing sort of, well, I don't know, it's an hour and a quarter, but it seems like 5 minutes, because what you have all had to say has been so interesting. I thought I knew what you all did at the UN, but I've been constantly amazed and definitely greatly impressed by all that you've had to say. And I was certainly, I've made myself a note about interns, because I know we had something saying that we could have younger women, somebody mentioned, and I think that would be great. Thank you to all of our speakers for giving up your time and talking to us this evening. Thank you to Lillian for organising, and to our ICJW tech man, David, thank you very much. This is being recorded, so it will be available for those people who didn't manage to make it to this evening. But thank you very much, and we do hope that at a future date we will have something very similar with our UN representatives from Geneva and Vienna, so that they can tell us what they do as well, which is slightly different. But as I say,
Definitely.
thank you to all of you. Be safe, and I hope you enjoy your Purim this week. It's going to be a bit different. Last year was the last time any of it, well, certainly the last time I did anything big at my synagogue, and I can't believe that a year has passed. So do all keep safe, and have a good week. Thank you.
I have a final words for you, for all of you. I want to thank you all for being here with us today. Please remember that you can always send your webinar questions still to the ICJW office, and we'll forward them to the panelists. Also want to say that the 2021 UN CSW information is already on our website at icjw.org. So please follow us on our website, Twitter, and Facebook page. And I want to say something to the panelists as well. Judy, Fran, John, Sarah, Carol, and Madeline, thank you for your years of work, dedication, and this wonderful, informative afternoon. And please remember, all our webinars are available. As Penny said, they'll be recorded, and you can see the old webinars on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe when you're visiting our channel. We hope to see you here at our next webinar too. And now, what I promise you, here's the video I promised at the beginning of webinar, you that stay till the end to see the video.